gentlemen, the side proposition has made two fatal assumptions in their speeches today. The first is that the only way for someone to be influenced by a candidate's religious affiliation is for their religious leader to endorse them. And the second is that people who are of a religion follow that religion blindly and with no common sense or discretion whatsoever. And there's these two fatal flaws that is going to show you the cracks in side proposition's case so far. Essentially, the fact is that we are currently aware of many candidates' religious affiliations already. We know that Romney was a Mormon, and we know that obviously many Mormons voted for Romney because he was a Mormon. The fact is, people are already influenced by the religious views of candidates without having the religious leaders of a certain church or religious group endorse them. Therefore, it's already an issue, ladies and gentlemen. The religious groups are already a huge voting bloc, as side proposition was saying. And eliminating the idea of religious leaders endorsing them will not eliminate the idea of a religious vote and groups in religion voting based on their religion. This idea already exists. Furthermore, I think a really important thing that side proposition has missed is the idea that religious leaders have rights too to profess their own political views. If we let Oprah, for example, profess her views and not people like the Pope, we're actually discriminating against the Pope specifically because he is religion. And that is something that, as a Western liberal democracy, a concept that side proposition seems to defend wholeheartedly, we must avoid. Yes?
Okay, but there are already instances in society where we force people to not pass their views on to others, i.e. we tell teachers not to influence their students with certain political views.
Okay, thank you. So that's a little bit different. So for example, side propositions kept talking about how we limit corporations, for example. We limit the amount of campaign donations they can provide to a campaign. However, we limit these things, we do not ban them entirely. The fact is that everyone has a right to a certain amount of influence over other people. Everyone has a right to a freedom of expression. And that's a right that we must maintain in this by not passing this resolution. Furthermore, I think I'd like to reiterate this thing that the side proposition keeps coming up to is the fact that people will blindly follow the leaders of their religion. And ladies and gentlemen, I think that's a really offensive view that every religious person has no idea of their own common sense or their own judgment. They simply follow the leader of their religion without even considering their own views or the own information they've been presented with. The fact is that this endorsement is not their final vote. There's a very big difference between endorsing a candidate and necessarily requiring every single one of your followers to vote for this candidate. And we believe that voters have enough judgment and enough rights as voters to make that decision themselves and not feel the need to follow exactly what their religious leaders say they should. Furthermore, I think side proposition keeps referring to sort of religion as one sole entity and sort of the religious group. And the fact is there are hundreds of religions in our world, and there are many different religious leaders, and not all these religious leaders will endorse the same candidate. It's not like one candidate will end up with the religious vote and another will not. There's a lot of distinctions between these groups. And furthermore, they talked about how religious groups are not elected, and so they shouldn't have that amount of power because they're not chosen by the people. However, I think it's very clear that religious groups are chosen by the people. You're not forced into a religious group, you're not forced to be a member of a church or any particular institution. You choose this, and you choose to listen to your religious leader to whichever extent you decide. It's not indoctrination, you have judgment of your own as a voter in the end. And that's a whole concept that side proposition is sort of ignored in their speech today. So I'd like to get into our last pillar, which is essentially an idea that side proposition has talked about a lot, the separation of church and state, and why that's so important. Because we as side opposition do not disagree with this. We think the separation of church and state is a really important principle in our society. And we think actually that's exactly why having religious leaders endorse political candidates is not a problem. Because the fact is that as a political system, when leaders get into power, they're not influenced by their religious affiliations. We have all kinds of rules in place in our society to eliminate this from happening. Even if a leader was elected because of their religious affiliation or because of the church or religious institution they were a member of, it does not necessarily mean that they will their decisions will be affected by this. Because we live in a secular society, we have this value that we believe in our country. Yes.
But would you not say if the majority of the populace of a country was Catholic and Catholic leaders were voted into power, that would not actually create a divide between Catholicism and other religions within that state?
Thank you. No, I completely disagree. What kind of leaders do we have in power right now? I'm pretty sure Stephen Harper is a Christian. Do I feel, a separation between people who are Christian and not Christian in our country? Absolutely not. That's because the religious affiliation of our leader is not what matters about them. It's not the most important aspect of their leadership, and oftentimes it doesn't affect their decisions. And that's really what side proposition seems to assume today, is that your religion is everything, and your religion affects every single decision you make and every single aspect you make, and that it's important to separate the church and state. And that's essential. We have that separation of church and state, ladies and gentlemen. We have established these rules that allow for those institutions to be separate entities. And that's why we don't need to go further and eliminate the endorsement of religious leaders. Thank you.